everyone, I hope you're doing well. Today we're gonna create this October bullet journal theme that features snakes, dark and bold colors, lots of ink drawings, and is inspired by this tattoo art style in general. I wanted to create something suited for Halloween, but that could still be used for other months as well, so I hope you'll get some new ideas from this. We're gonna get started by gluing this gray craft paper to the whole cover spread. I've had these papers forever, but I've never used them. This is not really a color I typically go for, but I thought why not go outside of my comfort zone a little bit and choose this darker and cooler gray. I thought this would also serve as a good background color for everything we're gonna add on top, since it's gonna add some darkness to the drawings, but still be a very neutral color. Pretty much all the drawings in this video required quite detailed pencil sketches, but I'm gonna skip them for the most part because we are gonna draw all the lines again in more detail with black pens. I think it can be a little bit repetitive to see me first make the pencil sketches and then draw the same thing with a different pen, so I hope you can still get a good idea of the initial shapes here. I wanted the whole bottom part of this cover spread to be used for a large October title, which we will color black in a little bit after we have some of these first decorations on the page. I started the black pen face with a 01 size Pigma micron, and we are first just gonna go over the outlines and main shapes. I started with this snake, and then when it comes to the flowers, I was just pretty heavily relying on my pencil sketches. I started from the basic shapes, so I just went over all the petals and made sure that the shapes are all clear and separated, at least as much as possible. If you struggle drawing detailed flowers like these, trust me, I know how that feels. The only reason I'm able to draw flowers nowadays is that I've drawn so many of them in the past few years. I actually have some earlier bullet journal videos where I was starting to practice drawing flowers but was really struggling with all the petal layers and directions and so on. So if these feel a little bit difficult for you, maybe choosing another type of flower with less complicated details but still using the same colors as we're gonna use in the video might create a pretty similar overall look. Something I wasn't sure how to draw were the scales in its body, so I kind of made it easier by drawing these diagonal lines in two directions all throughout the body, which creates these diamond shapes. I know it might look a little bit weird for now, but when we'll add some color and shadowing here later, it actually looked pretty good, and this also saved so much time and trouble from trying to draw each scale individually. But anyway, after the main shapes were done, I went over some of these lines and created these thicker black lines to resemble the shadowy parts in the folds. So I focused these kind of above or below the outlines, depending on which direction I was working with. And then I also added some extra wrinkle lines here and there, just to make the flowers look a little bit more detailed. But before we start the coloring, I wanted to get the big title out of the way. It's gonna be a dark, bold accent on this whole spread, and I wanted to make sure that it stands out enough even when we apply the colors. I think I just literally wrote bold vintage font on Pinterest search as something like this came up. So it's this very spiky kind of gothic font, and I think it suited the rest of the decorations and also the whole Halloween vibe very well. I didn't show the sketching part, but I basically calculated how much space I have for each letter and made some guidelines to get everything as straight and even as possible. I also used thicker pens here to make the coloring faster, but this title alone still took me about 30 minutes. I love how these letters turned out, but now it's time to take out some watercolors and start adding a bit of color on this spread. I've had a jewel tone theme in mind for a long time, but I never really knew what kinds of decorations I could create with those kinds of darker shades. So today I decided to go with this dark pink or wine red shade for the flowers and an emerald green color for the leaves. I wasn't working on a watercolor paper here, so this coloring phase is pretty much just adding a solid color layer everywhere. I did try to add some slight shadows in the flowers by darkening the folds and the areas close to where we added the thicker black lines, but eventually it didn't really show up here, so I just left it like this. As a contrast to the flowers and leaves, we're gonna keep the snakes in a more black and white color palette. So I just took a black shade and started to add some shadows and dimension to the snake. I did try to blend these black colors a little bit, so after applying the black color, I cleaned out my watercolor brush a bit and blended the color to a larger area to get this lighter gray shade. But after I finished all the coloring here on the left page, I jumped to the right side of this spread and drew some more leaves and this half flower that will show under the monthly calendar box that we'll add on top. I thought there was no point in drawing the whole flower since it would be covered anyway, so this just saved a little bit of time. I felt like this spread still looked a little bit empty, so first I started to add these black spike thingies around the flowers to fill those empty spots a bit. I think it helped, but I still wanted something more eye-catching since all the colors were so dark and muddy. So what I did is I whipped out my trusty foil paints. These are from the brand MABWatercolors, who kindly sent me these paints for free, and I chose this silver shade called Moonstone for this theme. My plan was just to add some stars around the page with it, but then I suddenly got this idea to add this silver color to highlight the snake's scales, and oh my god, I think this looked so good. I love how the foil paints look in the videos because they are picked up so well by my studio lights. I mean, don't get me wrong, they look great in person too, but it's nice to be able to showcase the effect here as well. I might have gotten a little bit excited about this paint, so I applied it kind of all over the snake and then started to draw these thin lines with dots and sparkle shapes. And I think this was definitely the missing element I needed on this spread. But now that the background is finally done, we are ready to glue the monthly calendar box here on the empty space. I had to double check how many rows I had here because the box somehow looked really small for me, but I guess I just used one less dot row for each box, which affects quite a bit on the overall size. Well, anyway, I used these black round weekday stickers that are from my own shop, wrote out the daily numbers, and after that we are done with this whole cover spread. I really like how this turned out. I think it looks so dark and cool. But now we are ready to move on to the next spread, which is gonna be my monthly planning and reflection spread as always. I know I've been using this same Dutch door layout for this spread a lot recently, but it just goes so well with most decorations I have in mind. Like this time I wanted to create this vertical snake drawing on the right side, so this layout will show that drawing on both of these pages. But anyway, I thought we could take a little break from the decorations and fill out this planning spread first. I started by writing out this plan title to the top using the same font as we used on the cover spread. I decided to commit to this font on all the spreads this month to keep things cohesive. And I think it's sometimes maybe more interesting to you guys to see something different than my regular fonts. But after this big title, I switched to a thinner pen and then wrote a cursive focus title under the first one. I haven't been super inspired to use these spreads recently because I've gotten so much use out of my weekly pages instead. So I'm keeping things very short and simple here. Honestly, my overall bullet journaling motivation has kind of been at an all-time low recently. I'll talk more about this towards the end of the video when I set up the weekly layout, but yeah, I think finally after over 6 years, I'm starting to feel the urge to kind of change things up and try something new, both in terms of these planning videos and my planner system. But anyway, before we get into that, let's focus on the rest of the spread first. So after the focus section, I glued in these 2 gray boxes that I'll use for habit tracking. I feel like these 2, which are for my exercise and reading trackers, are the ones I need the most, so I didn't bother adding more this time. There's still a little bit of room next to these boxes, and I thought that the most helpful thing for me would be to list some important dates and plans from the 4th quarter. There's always a lot going on for many of us with all the holiday plans and so on, so I thought that a concise list like this might be very helpful, not only as a reference point, but also just so you'll need to go and physically check or consider those dates. Then the last thing I did before we'll jump to more drawing was to write these week titles on this middle Dutch door page. It helps me a lot to divide the month like this and think of a priority or theme for each week. But that's pretty much all for the journaling parts. I know everything kind of looks colorless and boring right now, but we're gonna fix that with all the decorations. So I started by drawing this one lonely flower here in the upper corner, which was still blank. And this time I wanted to show you a little bit of the sketching process as well, in case it's helpful for some of you. I still almost always use a reference picture when I draw flowers, and you don't even need to follow them exactly. I feel like it's more about getting a balanced overall shape where the petals on each side of the flower look even, and the center of the flower is not leaning too heavily in any direction, if you know what I mean. But after this sketch, we are repeating the same steps as earlier. So first, starting from the main outlines using a black pen, and then moving on to create some thicker lines to resemble shadows. I actually went a little bit too far with the black shadows here, so the flower is gonna look really dark and kind of weird towards the top, but luckily it kind of fixed itself in the coloring part once we'll add a darker color here and deepen the shadows overall. So this time I was using watercolors straight on my bullet journal, so the same red shades look noticeably brighter than they did on the cover spread against the gray background. But I think it looked really nice nevertheless. It's very bold and draws a lot of attention, especially since the rest of the spread is so white and minimal. Again, I try to do my best to add some subtle shadowing with the colors, but it's mostly gonna be solid colors again. I think adding some darker shadows to the lower part of the flower helped to balance out the heavy top shadows. And we are also gonna add some sparkly foil paints here soon that will brighten up the area even more. So after this simple coloring phase was done, I drew a few black sparkles and then took the same silver paint and added some lines and dots with this one. This color obviously doesn't stand out as well against a white background because it's also a very light color, which is why I thought that adding a few of these dots and sparkles with black makes them stand out more. But the paint did look really nice against the darker colors in the flower, so I just kind of took this along the tops of the petal shapes to add some highlights and create this nice foil shift here again. But now after the flower here is done, let's quickly set up the reflection side before moving on to the big snake drawing on this spread. We're starting here with a similar title as we did on the planning side, so that everything looks nice and cohesive when we flip this page around. I know these titles might look very difficult, but I think the important point was just to create a good enough sketch beforehand. I think without a sketch, creating these titles would have been very difficult because it's really hard to estimate how much space you need when all the letters look kind of weird and decorated like this. So yeah, just measuring and calculating things a little bit beforehand is gonna save you from a lot of trouble. But after the title, I started this reflection side with a sleep tracker, which doesn't necessarily fit the page, but I didn't have any other place to put it, so here it goes. This Dutch door page was maybe a little bit too wide for it. Like, I'm never gonna get 4 or 10 hours of sleep. I just added the numbers here to fill the space as much as possible, and then the vertical numbers are the days in October. Then here on the right side page, I wrote out my typical on my mind question that I almost always use in these reflection pages. The point is just to be able to review the last month as a whole and write about whatever has stuck with me recently. Then I wanted to list a few of my hobbies to see what I've been doing lately. I fill these reflection pages at the end of the month, usually before I write out the next month's planning spread. But then we are finally ready to move on to this snake drawing that surprisingly ended up being the most time-consuming decoration for me in this setup. I wanted to create a black background box for this illustration, so we're starting with that to just get it out of the way. I was using this Uni Posca marker, which doesn't bleed through the bullet journal paper except for a small part towards the bottom where I accidentally created a huge color dot. I found it easier to create the drawing outlines this way because if you first regularly draw the outlines with the black pen and then create the black background along those lines, it's easy to lose some details or areas to that background color. So here I was trying to just slightly stay outside of my sketch lines and then color in the black areas only. But once the whole background was colored, I then took a thinner black pen and finished the rest of the line work. I once again went for these rose or peony flower shapes, some leaves and this snake between them. For some reason, I was really struggling here, especially with this snake's head, so it's gonna look a bit awkward until we fix it with the coloring. I also completely forgot to draw any of the thicker lines for shadows in these flowers and leaves before I started to color everything with the watercolors. I was wondering why everything was looking so flat, and that's when I realized it, so I had to add some darker lines afterwards. I was filming this quite late at night, so maybe that's why my brain wasn't fully working. Anyway, I started to like this much more after adding some more shadows and details. It's definitely a very dark and moody illustration again, but it's fun to create something like this every once in a while. Lastly, as you can probably guess, we're gonna take the silver foil paint and create some highlights and sparkles with it. I started from the snake again, and I think finally after the shadowing and this foil color, it started to create a very interesting textured look to these scales. Then I took the color to the background again to create these vertical silver lines. But after the drawing is done, that's finally it for this planning spread. I definitely think that the decorations changed the whole look here. But now let's move on to the last section, which is the weekly layout. I'm once again keeping this very simple and going for this vertical Dutch door layout. I'm using this for the next 5 weeks, so also for the transition week between October and November. For the decorations, we are doing something pretty simple here because I didn't have it in me to create another big drawing. So instead, I just painted some leaves and flower petals and finished everything with some foil paint again. Honestly, this was not the prettiest spread in my opinion. I don't know if I really liked how the decorations turned out, but considering how little time I had to film this, it was the best I could do. As for the weekly layout itself, I'm once again using the same setup I've been using for the past few months. So as I mentioned earlier, having this layout has honestly made me think if I would benefit more from having a pre-made planner that has lots of room to write a detailed task list for each day, and I've kind of been looking into some other options. The biggest reason I'm still using the bullet journal is definitely this channel and you guys. I've kind of seen it as my job more than anything, which I don't see as a bad thing. However, now that I've started to look outside the bullet journal world, I realized that there might be other options that would work for me better and that would still allow me to make monthly content. It makes me a little bit scared to think about other options because I know many of you are here just for the bullet journal, which I perfectly understand, but especially this year, I've just not felt satisfied with this system, and more I find myself wishing I had something ready to go that would help me more in my everyday life. I've been interested in the Hobonichi calendar system especially, which would still allow me to decorate my bullet journal with stickers, washi tapes and so on, but would still heavily reduce the time from doing everything from the scratch. And when it comes to the art stuff like painting, I could always completely separate that from the bullet journal and post painting tutorials like I've done so far. I've also felt limited by the bullet journal in the art sense because I've been really wanting to take my art skills to the next level by especially starting to practice oil painting. That's like one of my long-term dreams, but between running my shop and filming these monthly bullet journal videos, I just don't have time to do that. I know it's probably hard to imagine, but one of these videos from start to finish takes me about a full work week, considering that I also make a digital version of every theme. So yeah, it's kind of a lot of time every month, and in my mind, I know I need to make some kind of change, but it's just scary when you've built an audience over something this specific. But yeah, I'm sorry for not really explaining what I did here, but I do think that it's quite self-explanatory. I just felt like I needed to open up about this to you guys, and trust me, I'll do my best to figure out the solution that would let as few of you down as possible. But anyway, this is it for the October Halloweenish theme. Even if this is not your personal style, I still hope you enjoyed following along and maybe even got some new ideas. I'll definitely let you guys know whenever I get more clear about my plans for the next year. But for now, that's it for this monthly planning video. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you're having a lovely day or night wherever you are, and I'll see you in my next one. Bye bye!